Good morning, everybody. So I'm Vicke, and I come from London, from a SEO agency called Destilled. Now, before you come to me asking any sort of technical SEO questions, I have to first clarify that, sorry, I won't be able to help, because actually I'm more from the design side of things. So I work in Distilled's creative team. I'm one of the senior designers, and I've worked on a lot of our campaigns, overseeing the projects as well as designing for them. In terms of the sort of campaigns that we work for and that we create, this really ranges from a really broad spectrum of things. It can be anything from an interactive infographic, interactive data visualizations, all the way trickling down to games and quizzes, even PR stunts. This is an example of one of the recent games that we launched called Brexit Bus. Brexit, of course, being quite a contentious topic and a very popular topic at the moment in the UK, at least for the foreseeable future. But actually, funnily enough, although this was launched for the UK market, this was actually created for a Swedish company called Advisor. I don't know how big of a brand they are or whether you've heard of them, but they work in the financial space. They sell business loans, right? And for people who especially aren't in our industry, they're probably thinking, what on earth a Swedish financial brand is doing commissioning us to make a random game like this? Now, in the last 6 years of me working at Destilled, the objectives of a majority of our content and of our pieces, with this one being no exception, is that the clients come to us wanting links. They want to diversify their link portfolio or to generally gain more links with a hope that this will boost their Google rankings. And what this means is we strongly bias the way we ideate in order to produce things that are newsworthy and PRable, because that's what hits the objectives. But does Google still really even need links anymore? So last year, my colleague Tom Capper set about actually trying to answer this quite controversial question, and he delivered a presentation at one of Distilled's own conferences. These next 2 slides are taken directly from his presentation. Now, he specifically didn't want to be misquoted in a tweet like this. He didn't want anybody quoting him saying that links are dead. But his key takeaway was actually to try and get the audience thinking about this instead, and that is to stop taking the effectiveness of links for granted. Because links might not always be the right result or the right metric. After all, no one really knows how future-proof this way of marketing really is going to be. And instead, Tom reckons that we should be focusing our attention more on trying to win at brand awareness and brand perception, because ultimately, these might play a greater part in the way Google sees businesses, much more so than we currently even know how to give credit for. And especially because I have recently come to realize that links only deliver value in an indirect way. In a room full of marketers, I'm sure everybody knows that whether it's offline or online, marketing at its very core is about selling a product or service to people, right? Another emphasis here on people. Now, the way we currently measure success at the moment doesn't even take people into account. Whether or not someone is actually engaging with a piece of content or even seeing it doesn't matter, because all our clients care about is how many links we secure for them. But I think we can do better than this. I think we should stop limiting the potential of our content to just being about links and actually try and create things that can deliver real value by reaching real people, not just search engines. And so what can you expect for the remainder of this session? Well, I'm going to try and answer 3 key questions. First of all, what could this content be? Secondly, what's the value in it for you, aside from the links? And finally, what's the value for your audience? Now, first off, what could this content be or look like? This is what a little-known company did recently.
Contact avec le mail, c'est bon. Et go for entry, go for entry. Ok, on est en approche. Et vite qui se rapproche. C'est bien bas, assez loin. Voilà, il est en approche. Okay, we've got one. Oh, yes!
Okay. Right, so but hopefully everybody is awake now and you would have realized that this isn't a little-known company. This is, in fact, Red Bull. This is just one of their latest videos set for internet virality, set to join the ranks of their other sensational videos like the Stratos space jump that they did a few years ago. So Red Bull have made a name for themselves as the shining example of content done well. Back in 2007, they launched the Red Bull Media Company, which was an independent division of their brand. But before this, they'd already been experimenting in the space. And so what they've been doing for well over a decade is what we now refer to as branded content. And all industry experts seem to agree that branded content is going to be at the heart of every marketing strategy. And results from a recent study by Forbes can back this up. In collaboration with IPG Media Lab and Syracuse University, they conducted a study serving 4,000 of their US readers. And the results of this study show that branded content, shown here in blue, outperforms display ads, shown in yellow, in all of the categories they tested in, namely brand recall, brand favorability, and purchase intent. Okay, so that's all well and good. But branded content has become such an incredibly broad buzzword. It can mean totally different things to different groups of people across the search, the marketing, or the advertising industries. So I want to set the record straight. This is what I reckon. Broadly speaking, from an advertiser's perspective, branded content is typically paid media. Whereas from a marketer's perspective, it's more like earned media. And this is a side of things I want to talk about today, because this is what we do at Destilled. We've had to get really good at this, because we can't buy links and we don't buy links. We have had to get good at earning our attention for free, purely based on the merit of our content. Now, going back to the Brexit bus piece that I showed you, some may question and say, well, like all the other pieces we do, we slap the client's logo on it. So does that mean it's branded content? Well, technically, yes, but this only forms a small subset of branded content. Because ultimately, the success of it doesn't hinge on people looking at it or remembering the brand behind it. If this does happen, that's fantastic. But this is actually a byproduct. It's a nice to have. And a lot of our pieces, in particular, are minimally branded so as not to deter publications from wanting to cover it. And so this is content for link building. But what Red Bull have set out and have succeeded in doing, however, is a marketing strategy far greater than this. They create engaging content that's designed to reach people, to build communities, a community of like-minded adrenaline junkies and thrill seekers. And while the fact that a lot of their videos do become viral and has earned a lot of media attention means that they do improve their links and ranking, this for them is the byproduct, the nice to have. They're not afraid of using their brand name, their brand logos, their brand colors, but they're also not like slapping their product in your face. You don't see a single can of Red Bull in any of those videos, right? However, with the brand recognition, when you see this, you immediately recognize who it is behind them. And so this is content for brand building. And it's thanks to content like this that Red Bull's brand awareness accomplishment is through the roof. Amazing. So how do we be the next Red Bull? Well, here's a reality check. This would be a pretty short and frankly useless presentation if my key takeaway was to just throw a bunch of money at trying to make viral content in the hope that it will succeed. Not least because not every company has the capital to invest in its own media sector. Now, I couldn't find the exact stats for the base jump video that I showed you just now, but to give you some context, they spent $64 million, over $64 million on the space jump, which makes the $2 million they spent on a bike stunt seem like spare change. But one of the reasons why they can justify such extravagant spends is because they're no longer just a cost center, but they've evolved into a profit generator. For example, one of the many divisions within the Red Bull Media House is the Red Bull Content Pool. And this is where you can buy licensed video clips of their extreme sports and stuff. So in other words, this content of theirs is directly generating money. Now, during my research, I came across this report called Content, the New Marketing Equation. It's by a business analyst firm called Altimeter. And despite dating back to 2012, a lot of the stuff in there I still find really relevant. In particular, this content marketing maturity model. Now, the idea of this model is that right from the very first stage called stand through to the run stage at the end, the idea is any single company or organization can be plotted onto this scale in terms of their content efforts. So Red Bull, they're right at the very end. They're at the pinnacle of the content marketing evolution at the run stage. This is reserved for the few elite brands that have really become media companies in their own right. Now, I understand quite a few of you will be from larger organizations and agencies, but that doesn't mean to say that your department will have the budget to try and compete with the big boys like them. So, as the age-old saying goes, I think we should dial it back a bit. Don't try and run before you can walk. So let's see where we can all fit into the content maturity scale. And I'm quickly just going to zoom through these so you have an understanding of what happens at each stage. Now, along with the report comes this handy self-audit tool, with the idea being that you can easily figure out where you should sit and fit on the scale. Now, if you're in the very first stage called stand, this represents organizations that haven't really done much in terms of content creation. So you might have some social media channels, but most, if not all of your budget will still be going on push communications. So things like email marketing or paid advertising. Next longest stretch, stage number 2. These are companies which have started to dabble in content creation, but they're still trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. If, however, you have a more formal strategy in place and your content comes together under a more unifying brand, then you're likely in the walk stage. Stage number 3, where you can actually start to connect the dots between content and revenue. And past this, you're at a jog. Number 4. This is where you've got the strategy nailed, and now all there's left to do is to scale up and expand. But in order to get to this stage and to support this growth, you really need good executive buy-in. And needless to say, this is a pretty winning position to be in. But again, I'm gonna guess that not a lot of us in this room will be able to achieve this step just yet. But that doesn't matter, because actually, regardless of which level you're at, there's still room to excel in that area before trying to proceed on to the next stage, because results are relative. You can still achieve a lot within your means. Which is why the next example I'm going to talk about shows a company that has managed to make an impact in their own right using a method that I'm sure everybody can relate to. So slap bang in the middle of the maturity scale is a company called Eloqua. Now, just to preface is that Eloqua has since been acquired by Oracle, but what I'm talking about now was before this happened. So Eloqua are a B2B organization. They sell digital marketing automation software. And they started off by building up their company blog, leveraging internal expertise. So in other words, keeping things fairly low cost. But as well as building their company blog, they also worked on some separate resources, things like infographics, ebooks and white papers, other educational content, which they actually promoted for free via their blog, with a requirement, though, that before you download one of these, you had to fill in a lead gen form. This isn't rocket science. But by paying close attention to who was downloading these versus who then later converted, they were able to connect the dots. And they found that the ebooks alone were thought to have contributed to $2.5 million in annual recurring revenue. So having a system like this in place is great, because by being able to see this connection between creating content and then an upsurge in revenue, this makes for a really strong business case to essentially carry on making more of this. This is the ideal situation in an ideal world. And here comes the big but. But it's not always possible to measure the ROI of your content purely in terms of revenue. In fact, it can be incredibly difficult. And that's okay, because there are other ways that your content can prove its worth. And this is where we talk about the next section. What's the value in it for you aside from links? So let's talk micro-conversions. Micro-conversions are the small things that happen in the lead up to a full conversion. For example, something like growing your social following. And in general, these are things that are all relatively easy to track. Here I've chosen 5 different micro-conversions that your content could be geared towards achieving. So things like growing your social following, building a retargeting pool, increasing audience time spent with a brand, driving targeted traffic and awareness, and also attracting customers to test drive your product. This isn't an exhaustive list by any means, but the great thing about these is that they can all be concrete goals that are easily measured. However, there is the other aspect of value add that is much harder to pin down, much less concrete, and yet these are the ones that senior marketing execs will get you chasing after. Things that typically have the word brand in front of them. Brand awareness, brand sentiment, brand trust. Actually trying to measure these things can be an incredibly costly exercise, often involving things like commissioning surveys or polls, measuring impressions, which at the end of the day might not even give such an accurate picture. And so my takeaway here is, instead of trying to chase after these elusive metrics, you should focus your attention on doing the concrete things first, and trust that in doing so, you'll inevitably influence things like brand awareness, like brand trust. So here's an example of this. I'm going to talk about a brand that focused their attention on trying to get people to test drive their product. Now, when I say test drive, and the fact that I've got a steering wheel here, your mind might automatically jump to like test driving a car, a big ticket item. But actually, this isn't product sampling in the most traditional sense, but I wanted to show you this because it kind of goes to show that this type of marketing strategy could potentially work for any brand and any product if you just think about it in a clever way. So by pure coincidence, I've come across another Scandinavian brand, Pierre Robert, which you may have heard of. They sell things like sportswear, underwear, and hosiery. And the guys at Pierre Robert did a bit of research. They found that women were much more likely to continue buying their tights if they've actually already purchased once. And so in other words, retention and customer loyalty to the brand is proven to a certain extent, but they just need to get people past that first hurdle. And so this is when the Bike My Tights campaign was created. If anyone is from Stockholm, might have seen it, heard of it, or even tried it, essentially, Pierre Robert tapped into the really frustrating thing that happens when, as a woman, when you're out, you're having a great time, and then you realise that you've ripped your tights. Ugh, bummer. So they clocked on to this as the perfect opportunity to showcase their product. So over the course of 3 weekends, when this campaign took place in Stockholm, if this unfortunate scenario were to happen to you, all you needed to do was to take a picture of your ripped tights, put the hashtag #BikeMyTights, and apparently a bike courier would come and hand deliver you a brand new pair of the Pierre Robert tights. Over the course of the weekends that this campaign took place, a total of 1,560 pairs of tights got sampled. Now, while this might not seem like such a mind-blowing number, think about it this way. This is way more impressive than something like an impression and way more valuable because this is proven brand and product exposure. And as a bonus, they found that the consideration interest in buying their tights did increase by 75% afterwards. So with this campaign, while the overarching goal may have been to build positive brand sentiment, by focusing their attention first on getting people to actually try the product and then measuring it, they found that the brand sentiment needle was moving in a positive direction anyway. Which is a really great place to segue into my final section. Content marketing is by no means a one-way relationship. You have to care about your audience. If someone has been generous enough to spend time with your content and engage with it, it can't just be beneficial to you, it has to be valuable for them as well, right? So in Pierre Robert's case, they rewarded their audience by giving them a free pair of tights. Now, while complimentary hosiery may not be the solution for every company, this is a time to think long and hard about what your value proposition is. What are you offering your audience? So let me introduce the How, Now, Wow framework. Equipped with this framework, Monster, which is a job listing site, reported an increase in page views of over 18 million from the course of 2015 to 2016, which then had a direct effect on increasing job searches by 28%. So what exactly does the How, Now, Wow framework mean? Well, I'm going to use Monster as a case study to try and explain each of these sections. But first of all, I think it's easiest to think of it like a triangle. At the very bottom, you've got your how content. This forms the base, forming the bulk of your content offering, and should be stuff that's relevant, that's available 365 days a year. Think of it as laying down the foundations. The how in it stands for how can you help your customers? Because one of the most obvious ways in delivering value is by pinning down what people want to know and then delivering on it. So as a starting point, typical search marketers might decide what sort of keywords you want to rank for and then work backwards in figuring out what people are looking for around those. For a job site, this involved creating articles like this: Top 10 Tips for Salary Negotiations. Now, this is the more obvious approach of creating how content, but there is a second approach that might just help set you apart from your competitors. And this approach involves thinking laterally. It's a bit of a brain tease. You need to think about things that your audience will want to know, but they don't know they want to know it yet. So, as well as top 10 tips for salary negotiation, how about salary negotiation tips from an FBI hostage negotiator? It's hard to imagine anyone going into Google and typing this in the search bar, but if it's something that they might see on the side of a blog or as a paid recommendation, they're much more likely to click on it because it's intriguing. So on to the now. This is essentially what it says on the tin. It's content that is now. The value lies in its topicality. You're rewarding your audience by making sure that they're kept up to date with the latest trends, news, and data. But this, of course, doesn't just mean rehashing the news. It has to be relevant to your vertical in some way. And again, there are two approaches to it. But because of the nature of this, there's going to be slightly less of this than your how content because you're releasing stuff as and when it is relevant. So there might be certain days in the year which are of particular importance to a brand. For example, we've got a client in the US who specialize in fake Christmas trees, realistic fake Christmas trees. And so the lead up to Christmas is, of course, crucial for them. And so these are times when you can prepare for the predictable. Figure out if there's anything relevant for your content calendar that you can prepare for in advance. Now, for a job site, it wasn't immediately obvious to me what this might be until I came across this article. 5 New Year career resolutions. Extremely relevant because if you think about it, at the beginning of a new year, people are thinking about new beginnings, new starts, new jobs. And so this is when Monster were able to preempt this and prepare for it. However, the other side of things is that news is actually made up of a majority of unpredictable and unexpected things. And so these instances, you need to prepare to be agile, to act quickly. Remember when Pokemon Go blew up a couple of years ago? It really took the internet by storm. You're probably thinking, how on earth does this relate to a job site? Well, they managed it. A few days after the Pokemon Go app was released, they published this article on how to catch a Pokemon job. And finally, we come to the wow. It's content that wows. The value lies in the fact that it's entertaining for people. It's typically stuff that is more visually engaging, more like the things that we create at Destilled, so the sort of bigger hero-type content pieces. And wow pieces form the smallest percentage of your content offering, which is why it sits right at the very top of the triangle. But because you're doing less of it, it means you have more time to dedicate on actually experimenting with new formats to make sure that you create something that's truly sensational. And this is also a fantastic opportunity for a brand to step aside from the more corporate tone of voice in order to connect with people on a more human level. Now, going back to Monster, one of the things that you can imagine people searching for a job might be interested in is how to write a great CV. So they've got it covered with an informative YouTube video like this one. However, they were able to take the same topic, turn it on its head, and create something that's much more visually engaging, much more entertaining, and connects with people and shows a human side of their brand. And so for this, it resulted in this video, the recipe for a great resume. Now, with these two examples, you can see the distinct contrast between content that's designed to be how versus content that's designed to wow, despite stemming from essentially the same subject matter. So that's your how, now, wow triangle. And equipped with this framework, this should form the basis of what value to offer your audience in order to make them care about your brand and what you have to say. Now, to briefly recap, don't try to run before you can walk. Figure out where you fit on the content maturity scale to know where to focus your efforts on, because results are relative. Focus on the concrete micro-conversions and trust that in doing so, over time, this will result in building a brand. In exchange for your audience's time and engagement, you need to reward them with something. This means laying down the foundations with how content that's useful and on demand, interspersing it with now content that's topical, and and every so often surprising them with wow content that delights. While links may not be going anywhere anytime soon, I think our offering as marketers doesn't need to end here. Let's start getting credit for the broader effects. Use the frameworks that I've given today in order to do this, and start making things that truly go beyond link building. This is the direction that we've been moving towards in Destilled, so I hope you feel compelled to join us on this journey. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vicke. It was very interesting. What do you think? Yes. Do we have any questions?
Not yet.
Not yet?
Please send in.
Easy job for me then.
Yeah. Do you have any questions? And maybe not Twitter?
Hope this shows I've done a good job then.
Yeah, I think so.
No questions.
I have a question then, though.
Okay.
So if I should start walk,
Yeah.
what could I do if I'm just a small company? Not just a small. If I am a small company,
Yeah.
and I would like to start walking, where should I start?
Okay, so although I just say don't try to run before you can walk, don't try to walk before you can stretch. So you need to kind of start like right at the very beginning.
Yeah.
For example, like if you're standing, you need to first build up your social channels. And then like just start experimenting with things. So it's only after you try a few things that you realize what will work for you, because it's very easy to read lots of case studies and try and like mimic what other companies are doing. That's good, but you'll soon encounter that like what works for one company doesn't necessarily work for you.
No.
So it is a case of just experimenting and making sure that you can actually track the results in a way that makes it meaningful for you to carry on in doing it.
And if I can't track it, like you said, sometimes it's difficult to track it. If I can't track it, do you think I should do it anyway? Some kind of campaign or content? I mean, should I do it even if I can't track everything?
It depends on if it's like a small scale.
Yeah.
So, for example, a while back, like this, I'm talking about a few years ago, at Destilled, a lot of our projects, we didn't really do like paid promotion for it, like on Facebook or anything. And then someone just had the idea, oh, why don't we just throw like a couple hundred dollars at it? And just in doing so, like we weren't sure what we were going to get. Obviously, you can track things by Facebook, but this is just an example. Like if it's a small budget that you're happy to essentially use and try, then yeah I would say go for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Vicke.
You're welcome. Thank you.